Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Shingles Audio Collection Volume 4 by Robert Bevan, Rick Gualtieri, Steve Wetherill, and John G. Hartness. Narrated by Cal Wembly and Cassandra Myles. 1. Carnival of Psychos, John G. Hartness. 1. Richie Spoonerman ran like hell. Or, if we're being honest, Richie Spoonerman ran like a fat kid trying to wend his way through a hall of other kids, most of whom didn't like him a whole lot, so they weren't real inclined to get out of his way. So Richie really bounced and shoved and grunted and hopped like a fleshy pinball in husky jeans and a T-shirt that had a silhouette of a girl swinging on a pole that said, "I support single moms." His principal, Ms. Demchocks, gave him a week's detention for wearing a misogynistic slogan on his clothes, but Richie didn't care. It's not like he had anything to do after school most days anyway. But today was not most days. Today was the day Sean Dustman had sworn to kick him in the face so hard he'd be shitting teeth for a week. Today was the day Sean swore he was going to rip Richie's head off and shit down his neck. Today was the day the biggest, meanest, nastiest kid in 8th grade had sworn to punch Richie in the face so hard he'd have to go back through puberty. In short, Richie didn't give a fuck about detention because he didn't expect to live long enough to serve out his sentence. And he sure as hell wasn't going to if these fuckwads didn't get out of his way. "Fucking move!" Richie bellowed, right before he plowed into the side of Matt Thomas, knocking the slender, dark-haired boy into a wall of lockers so hard that his head left a dent. He could see daylight up ahead, just a little sliver of salvation beckoning to him like the girls on the cover of his dad's private DVD collection. His dad was such a fucking hipster. He watched his porn on DVDs because the picture quality was better instead of just getting a boob hub subscription like everybody else's dad. That tiny ray of daylight, that minuscule sliver of hope, was snuffed out just like Richie's dreams of passing algebra when Mr. Good stepped in front of Richie and blocked out the sun. Richie slammed into the prodigious gut of the gray-bearded math teacher, bouncing back and landing flat on his ass in the middle of the hall. Amazingly, as soon as the math teacher appeared, all the kids that had been clogging up the halls had somewhere to be. "Where are you going in such a hurry, Richie Spoons?" Mr. Good always called him Richie Spoons. He was that kind of teacher, the kind that made up silly nicknames for students, even if they weren't taking his class. And Richie certainly wasn't taking Mr. Good's advanced algebra class. He was barely passing Mrs. Nance's normal dipshit algebra on his best day. "Home, Mr. Good. I've got to hurry home and take care of my grandma. She's real sick." He tried to affect a hangdog expression, but it was really hard to look sad when terrified. "Now, Richie Spoons, why you lie to me, son? I know good and well your grandma died 2 years ago. You can't pull one over on me that easy, Spoons. Remember, I taught your—" Mr. Good kept talking as he helped Richie to his feet, but the boy wasn't listening anymore. He'd heard these lines from Mr. Good for 3 years, how he'd taught Richie's mother and Richie's father and his older brother and his older sister, and how all of them had been so good at what Mr. Good called the rithmatics, and how he couldn't fathom, that's what he always said, and for the longest time Richie thought he was saying he couldn't phantom, which made even less sense, how Richie was so gifted in music but couldn't work out a math problem to save his life. Richie had heard every word of it before, but the problem he was trying to solve right then, the problem that might literally save his life with its answer, was a problem of physics, not algebra, like the physics of how he was going to reach escape velocity from the hallway and the front parking lot of the school before Sean Dustman's fist in motion came in contact with Richie's face and turned Richie into an object at rest, permanently. Suddenly, like a ray of divine light streaming down from the heavens, Richie saw his savior, his most unlikely savior. Ms. Fergus, the very Scottish and very tall biology teacher, stepped out of her classroom as she saw Mr. Good hauling Richie down the hall by his shoulder and telling him all about his family history, a family history that Richie was intimately familiar with, having lived through it. "Mr. Good, what a pleasant surprise!" the jovial bio teacher said, a grin splitting her wide face. "And young Mr. Spoonerman! Well, now, what brings the two of you down my hallway this afternoon?" Richie wasn't interested in sticking around for whatever strange teacher flirting ritual was about to commence. The whole school knew that Mr. Good and Ms. Fergus were dating ever since Megan Leister sold them lemonade at a church fundraiser 3 months ago. But they tried to pretend like they weren't, and whenever they were around each other at school, things got hella weird. But Mr. Good relaxed his grip on Richie's shoulder when his girlfriend popped into the hall, and Richie managed to wriggle free and sprint off toward the exit. "Gotta catch the bus, Mr. Good. Thanks for the talk. Later, Miss Fergus." He sprinted off down the hall toward daylight, his blue and red backpack bouncing against his tailbone with every bounding step. Richie burst out into the sun, into the glorious freedom that was his unpummeled afternoon, and almost wept with joy at the beauty of the sky he never thought he'd see again. The birds were chirping, the wind was blowing a gentle breeze through his hair. The scent of the weed killer the school groundskeeper, Mr. McHodge, sprayed every afternoon, no matter how many or how few weeds there were, filled the air, and life was good. He was young, he was free, and he was safe from Sean Dustman's ass-kicking. Until a fist shot out from the side of the building and nailed him right on the jaw. Richie spun around, momentarily wrapped in the unjustness of a world that would give a kid the faintest glimpse of refuge, only to yank it away like ripping a bandage off and tearing out every little arm hair with it. As he fell, as the light faded from the world and he slipped into unconsciousness, Richie saw the horrifying face of Sean Dustman standing over him, smiling from ear to ear. "Ow." Richie didn't open his eyes, just lay flat, feeling the pain radiating from his jaw. He wasn't outside, he could tell that much. The smell of freshly cut grass and weed killer was gone from the air, replaced with the scent of bleach, pee, and stale farts. The ground beneath him was smooth and oddly cold. He reached out, padding along beside him, reaching for a patch of grass or a teacher's shoe or anything to give him a sense of where he was. Finding nothing, he opened his eyes, closing them tight at the fluorescent light that bore into his head like a drill. "Shit, I think I have a concussion." "You don't have a concussion. What you have is a bad case of stupid." Richie knew that voice. The last time he heard that voice, it was calling him an asshole as he shoved the voice's owner into a locker while he ran down the hall trying to get away from Sean. "Matt?" He covered his eyes with his hand and opened them again. Slowly moving his fingers, he watched as Matt's round face came into focus. He had a concerned look on his face, nothing new where Richie was concerned. There was also a small scrape on his left eyebrow, probably a result of his making out with the locker, also thanks to Richie. "Yeah," Matt said. "You got any other friends that will carry you into the bathroom after Sean knocks you out cold with one punch? I mean, damn, Richie, at least make him hit you a couple of times before you go down." "He snuck up on me," Richie said, thinking to himself that it didn't matter. Sean Dustman could have been standing in front of him, winding up like he was throwing out the first pitch at a Braves game, and Richie still would have been kissing pavement after that punch. But thanks for dragging me in here, even if it does smell like pee." He held out a hand, and Matt pulled him up to a sitting position. Looking around, it made perfect sense that it smelled like pee, since he was sitting on the floor of the boys' bathroom. Making a sound of disgust, Richie scrambled to his feet and bolted over to the sink, where he vigorously washed his hands and splashed water on any part of his exposed skin that touched the bathroom floor. "Ew, dude, it's nasty in here. Why didn't you take me to the nurse's office?" "Because the nurse went home an hour before last period, so her office is locked. Besides, Harold just cleaned in here. That floor is as clean as can be, dude. See? No worries." Matt reached down, pressed his hand into the floor, then licked his palm. "Not a problem." "There's literally poop in the corner of the room, dude. I watched Dexter Alnster drop trow and crap right under that window 3 days ago. His dried-up turd is still laying there." Richie pointed over to the floor beneath the window, where there was indeed a small, dried brown thing that very closely resembled a Baby Ruth candy bar. Matt's face cycled through 4 different shades of green before settling on one it liked. Then he dashed over to the sink, mashed the soap dispenser 6 times, scrubbed his tongue with the foamy pink disinfectant, and stuck his whole head in the sink to try and rinse his mouth out. The whole time he made gagging noises and thrashed and flailed like the time he'd stuck a fork in the electrical outlet in his bedroom. Richie wondered if he was going to have to get a board to knock him off the sink like he'd done with the outlet, but after about half a minute, Matt straightened up, spit several more times into the sink, and glared at Richie. "You're an asshole." "Nobody told you to lick your hand after you touched the floor of the shitter, man." "But if you hadn't told Sean that his mother was blowing dudes behind the red box machine by the drugstore to get them to buy her decongestant pills, he wouldn't have knocked you out. Then I wouldn't have dragged you in here, and I wouldn't have gotten poop germs on my tongue." "Well, if Sean's mom hadn't been blowing guys for generic allergy medicine behind the red box at the pharmacy, I never would have mentioned it to him." Matt thought for a few seconds, then nodded. "Okay, that's fair. So even though this is all Sean's mom's fault, you still owe me one for carrying you to safety and making me lick poop hand." "I'm not licking your hand, dude. I've literally just seen where it's been." "Nah, you're not licking my hand, you douche. You're going to hang out with me tonight." "Nah, man, can't tonight. New episode of Real Housewives of Hoboken comes on tonight, with the polygamist bachelor right after. My dad called it train wreck TV night. It's like a family thing." "You just watch those shows to feel better about yourself." "It works." "Good point. But you still gotta come with. It's the last night before the weekend prices kick in tomorrow." "Weekend prices for what?" Richie asked, knowing in the pit of his stomach that he was going to regret ever opening his mouth, just like Sean's mom. Matt didn't answer, just reached into his back pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and passed it over. Richie unfolded the paper, jumping a little as a huge head with a painted-on red smile and tufts of orange hair sticking out from over the ears grinned out at him underneath the words, "Come to the greatest show in town." Under the clown's face was another arc of words, "Ramati's Carnival of Fun, special midweek admission." Richie looked up at his friend, who stood there grinning like an idiot. "Dude, no." "Dude, yeah! We are totally going to the carnival!" 2. Richie and Matt gave the fat woman at the front gate $20. She looked at the boys. "How old are y'all?" 13, Richie said proudly. He knew Matt was a little short for his age, so he wanted to make sure the woman didn't think his friend was a little kid. "You sure?" the woman asked, jerking her head to the side where a sign hung showing the ticket prices. It was a battered old metal sign with adults $5, children 12 and under $2, Game ride tickets, $1 each. Yeah, Richie said. You don't think I know how old I am? The woman sighed, brushed a strand of sweaty gray hair off her face where it had slipped free from the ponytail she had her curls pulled back into, and said, Okay then, $10 for 2 tickets. You want change or you want tickets? Tickets, please. She handed Richie 2 strings of 5 tickets. He passed one to Matt and folded the other up, shoving it into the front pocket of his jeans, as he vowed to himself not to blow all his tickets on the first game he saw this time. The 2 boys walked into the carnival, set up on Old Man Gilfillan's farm a mile outside of town. Matt's mom hadn't been able to give them a ride because she was working a double down at the landing strip club by the airport, and Richie's dad had an important business meeting with some equipment suppliers from South America tonight down at the docks, so the boys had ridden their bikes to the carnival, chaining them together with Matt's bike lock and bolting them to the barbed wire fence outside the gate. Richie just hoped the fence wasn't really electric, like the sign said it was, or it might be tough getting their bikes later that night. Man, Matt said, $20 doesn't get you a whole lot, does it? Nope, Richie agreed. That's why it's a good thing I swiped another 40 out of my dad's shoebox full of secret cash under the bed. He held up 2 tightly rolled bills and grinned. Nice! Matt gave him a high five. But why are they all rolled up like that? I don't know. They were sitting on these bags of flour all lined up in little baggies. But who cares? This ought to get us another 20 tickets each. Dude! Matt's face broke into a grin as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of folded $1 bills. I went into my mom's cookie jar and grabbed a bunch of her tips. I've got another $30. We can party like rock stars, man. Well, like rock stars that can't drink, don't do drugs, and have never even seen a groupie, Richie said. Okay, so we can party like Christian rock stars, or like folk rockers. So, really boring rock stars? Richie asked. I'll take it. Let's walk the midway before we get more tickets, so we can scope out what games look the least rigged. Good call. I'm not in the mood to relive the giant hammer swing debacle of 2018. Last year was not exactly a banner year for the dynamic duo, as the friends called themselves. Their trip to the carnival ended in a less than auspicious fashion last year at the giant hammer game, where the player, originally enough, swings a really big hammer and hits a lever down at the bottom of a big board. The seesaw smacks into the bottom of a metal ball that rises up the marked board, letting the world know if the player is a wimp, a bookworm, a gym teacher, a weightlifter, a stud, or if they manage to smack the metal orb all the way up the board and ring the bell at the top, a patriarchy-crushing feminist. Richie blew through a whole string of 10 tickets trying to ring the bell before he went broke, finally realizing that the patriarchy was safe from this 7th-grade anarchist for at least one more night. Yeah, Richie agreed. This year's going to be different. 2 swings, and either I ring the bell and crush the patriarchy, or we go play whack-a-mole. Matt nodded sagely, and the pair set off down the noisy midway, quickly becoming lost in the noise, lights, and sounds of the carnival. The carnival rose up out of the pasture like a garish metropolis, with the blinking lights causing a yellow glow to pulse in the sky all the way to the edge of town. The classic calliope music blared from pole-mounted speakers aimed down at the throngs of townies and folks coming in from the surrounding farms, all throwing money at the carnies, running the games in concession trailers as fast as they could catch it. The rides were the standard carnival fare, with the spinning swings twirling high above the midway, eliciting screams of the boys and girls as they flung outward from the rotating pole in the middle, and drawing crowds of boys to the ground under the ride, hoping for a peek up the unattended skirts of the girls. It never happened, but that didn't stop anyone from looking and hoping. The Barfur was the small, rickety roller coaster, with its 2 3-car trains whirling around the hastily assembled curves and inclines, eliciting screams of terror and groans of whiplash as it clattered along. The whirligig was a set of 8 aluminum cages hanging from arms that arced out from a rust-coated central shaft that croaked and groaned until the ride got up to speed. Then the groans turned into a high-pitched squeal of metal on metal as the cars spun and flung around in circles, slamming the riders into the sides of the benches and cages to their masochistic delight. "Man, I always forget how awesome this place is," Matt cried, staring up at the Ferris wheel. "This year I'm going to ride that thing, I swear it." "Okay," Richie agreed. "Let's go right now." The grin fell from Matt's face as a slightly green hue rose. Maybe in a little bit. I want to save that for last. We should work up to the Ferris wheel, you know?" A knowing look crossed Richie's face at his friend's words. "Sure, man, that makes sense. We'll work up to it. But before we leave, we're riding the wheel." He pulled the string of tickets out of his pocket, tore off 2, and shoved them into his other pocket. "I'm saving the tickets so we don't run out." Matt was still pale when he grinned at his best friend, but he no longer looked like he was about to pitch his lunch up all over Richie's shoes. Richie took that as a win. 3 hours later, their bellies full of soda, hot dogs, pretzels, cotton candy, and funnel cakes, the boys were down to 1 ticket each and standing in the middle of the midway, as well as a moral conundrum. "I know I can win it if I can just get one more throw," Matt said. "Look at it, Rich. It's the coolest thing ever." He pointed up at the top prize in the milk can pitcher booth, a neon green skateboard with pink LED lights mounted to the underside and electric blue wheels. "Yeah, man, it's pretty badass. But the can pitch game costs 2 tickets, and that would leave us bankrupt." "We might as well blow our last few tickets anyway. The place is shutting down soon," Matt said. Richie looked around. Matt was right. The midway was almost deserted. Only the most hardcore riders of rides and players of games still wandering the traffic-worn path in the grass that held a herd of cows only 5 days ago. "Okay, one more run. But then we've got to haul ass if we're going to hit the Ferris wheel before they shut it down." Matt's eyes widened, and his hand trailed to his stomach almost of its own accord. "I thought you said the can pitch would bankrupt us." "Bankrupt except for our Ferris wheel tickets," Richie said, pulling a pair of tickets out of his other pocket. "I stashed these, remember?" "I remember," Matt said, and somehow he didn't look nearly as happy as Richie expected after learning that he wouldn't have to miss the grand finale of the evening. He trudged after Richie on the way to the can pitch for one last shot at neon green immortality. After striking out on his last shot at the can pitch, a dejected Matt scuffed his feet the entire way to the bottom of the Ferris wheel. Just as they got there, the carny, a gaunt man with Daryl on his shirt, closed the gate on the last car and turned to them. "Sorry, kids. Last ride of the night, and we're full." "But we saved our tickets just to do this last," Richie cried, waving the 2 sweat-stained and pocket-crumpled tickets under the carny's florid nose. "Kid," the man said, leaning down so his breath blew straight in Richie's face. It smelled a lot like pine trees, which was odd, but Richie just took a step back and didn't comment. "I don't give a shit if you sold a kidney to go on this ride. We're full, and you ain't getting on." Richie's bottom lip quivered, his belly shook, his shoulders bounced, and he looked up at the ride operator with eyes brimming over with tears. "Why did you have to mention kidneys, sir?" He made his voice as high as he could to really pour on the plaintive. "My friend here, he goes in tomorrow to have surgery. He's donating his kidney to his baby brother, who was born without any. He'll be in surgery for 28 hours, and there's no guarantee he'll make it. I promised him that if tonight was his last night on Earth, that I would make it special. We've had a grand night at the carnival, but the cherry on
top was supposed to be closing everything out with the Ferris wheel, so he can look down over the town he calls home one more time, and maybe, just maybe, get close enough to God in heaven so that the big man upstairs would hear his prayers and make his little brother Tim well enough to play outside for the first time in his life."
As Richie spun his tale of utter bullshit, one lone tear spilled over and ran down his cheek, hanging for a second on the edge of his jaw before plummeting to the ground. The carny looked at Richie, then at Matt, who poked out his bottom lip and tried to look as pitiful as possible, then back to Richie. The skinny man laughed, and that pine tree breath came rolling over Richie again. "Kid, you're 100% full of shit. But that's the best line of crap I've heard in a week, so you know what? Go ahead and get on the ride." He jerked the handle once, swinging an empty car into place, and held the gate for Richie and Matt to climb on. The carny grinned at them, showing off all 7 of his teeth. "You kids have fun, because I always make the last ride of the night extra long and extra fast." "That's what she said," Matt said, and punched Richie on the shoulder. Richie turned to punch him back, but he was thrown back against the seat as the Ferris wheel took off like a rocket. Richie had just enough time to see the carny's head thrown back in laughter as the wheel flung them up into space. Matt's scream of terror cut off abruptly at the peak of the wheel's arc, and it turned to the sounds of copious vomiting as 3 hot dogs, a strawberry slushie, 4 Cokes, a salted pretzel with hot mustard, another slushie to cool down off the spicy mustard, and a funnel cake all bolted from Matt's stomach and splattered out behind them, introducing all of his food for the night to all of the people in the cars immediately below them. "Dude," Richie said, "maybe we should have ridden this first." 3. The Ferris wheel came to a stop, and Matt pawed at the latch to release the bar across their laps before vaulting from the swinging seat to land on all 4s in the grass and puke up the very last of his lunch, presumably his lunch from the past 2 days, if the amount of food already splattered across the crowd of angry Ferris-wheelers was any indication. "Dude," Richie said, patting his friend on his shoulder, "are you okay? And when did you eat popcorn?" "Water," Matt gasped from the ground. Richie looked around, but there was no relief in sight. The nearest concession stands were all closed up for the night, and the carnival hadn't exactly brought portable water fountains with them on the road. "I'll go get you something, buddy. I see a drink stand open down the midway. You just get up when you can stand, and wait for me by the front gate, okay?" Matt didn't say anything, just nodded and resumed dry heaving and convulsing like he was about to hurl up the insoles of his Chuck Taylors. Richie gave an apologetic wave to the angry kids and grown-ups standing outside the entrance to ride, all grumbling about dry-cleaning bills. Like any of those dipshits even own anything that has to be dry-cleaned. Spray them off with a water hose and they'll be fine. Maddest of all was the Ferris wheel operator, who not only had to listen to the bitching of all the sodden fairgoers, but he had to do it all while wearing most of Matt's last 2 breakfasts in his hair, since he was directly in the splash zone when the Gat bomb went off. Richie kept his mouth shut and snuck through the crowd with his head down, not wanting their anger to turn on him. And frankly, he could have used that hose himself. There were a few chunks on the toes of his shoes that looked an awful lot like half-digested hot dog. He walked quickly down the midway, looking for any place that might sell him a bottle of water. He still had $5, and if he couldn't buy one, maybe he could find one near the top of a trash can that had some water still in it. Deciding he liked that idea a lot, since it wouldn't cost him 3 of his remaining $5, Richie stopped, walked to the side of the thoroughfare, and started rooting through the cleanest top layers of the big metal drum full of trash. He found a couple of bottles, but one was empty, and another had a cigarette butt floating in the half a bottle.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?